Okay, now we're ready. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kenneth Miller. I'm a member of this church. Today we're going to be in Genesis 32, 22 to 32. We're going to be talking about wrestling. Yeah, they wrestled in the Bible too, I guess. I'll read the scriptures to you, then I'll kind of go back and give you a little brief history as it leads up to our scriptures for today. In Genesis 32, 22 to 32, it says, "And he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Jabbok. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of day. Now, when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, 'Let me go, for the day breaks.' But he said, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' So he said to him, 'What is your name?' And he said, 'Jacob.' And he said, 'Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. But you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed.' Then Jacob asked, saying, 'Tell me your name, I pray.' And he said, 'Why is it that you ask about my name?' And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God's face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Peniel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle, that shank which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip. And in the muscle, that shank, some of the things that led up to this is Jacob had been working for his father-in-law for over 20 years. 14 of those years was for his wives. But in the end, when Jacob decided to leave, they had some disagreements with his father-in-law, Laban. Laban was his mother's brother. Jacob had one significant other issue after he settled his disagreement with Laban, and that issue that needed to be resolved was his relationship with his brother Esau. Jacob had taken Esau's birthright and blessings from their father Isaac, and the memory he had of Esau was that his brother was planning on killing him. That's when his mother told Jacob to go live with his, her brother in the land far away. So, so, so Jacob went. But during that time, he was with Laban. Laban, I guess you could say, cheated him out of his wages and out of what he was there for, was to marry Laban's youngest daughter. But but he had agreed to work with Laban for 7 years for him to marry his youngest daughter. But when the time came, Laban gave him his oldest daughter instead. And so he agreed to work with Laban for another 7 years to be able to marry the daughter, the younger daughter of Laban, which he wanted in the first place. So Jacob had been afraid of Esau for the past 20 years due to what transpired before he left. Because Esau had threatened to kill him. Now, leading up to what our scripture is about, Jacob sent a message to Esau that he was coming to see him. And in return, the messenger told Jacob that Esau was bringing with him 400 of his men to meet to meet Jacob. Therefore, that made Jacob even more afraid to meet his brother, because he thought his brother was coming to kill him with that many men. So Jacob split up his party that he was with by putting his maidservants in one group, his first wife in the second group, and him and Rebekah in the third group. The reason for this is Jacob thought that by splitting up his party, if Esau was coming to kill him, they would kill the first group and the others would have a chance to escape. You know, something that these verses reveal is how God changes people when they are encountered by Him. What are some of the changes that you've occurred when you have encountered God?
Some of that fear goes away because He is with me. God is in control, and if you listen to that Spirit,
very true. You know, there are many times that I have encountered this same situation because God can change people if we are willing to allow Him to help us change. And some of those changes are easy, some of them are hard. You know, we encounter God on a daily basis due to what we're faced with that day. And if we listen to Him and do what He asks of us, He'll help us to make those changes that we need to make. All we have to do is wait upon Him to lead us in those changes and help us to make those changes. Jacob prayed to God. He based his prayer on God's covenant with Abraham, his father Isaac, and how God had promised to uphold that covenant with him also. And Jacob humbly asked God to rescue him from his brother Esau. In 22 to 33, 22 and 23, when Jacob first encountered what he was going to do, he prayed to God for God to rescue him from his brother. And also, he wasn't going to hide from his brother Esau anymore. He was going to face his brother and see what happened when they encountered each other. After dividing everyone up and everything with him into groups, hoping at least one group would escape Esau's attack, Jacob prayed to God to rescue from Jacob. Jacob also came up with an idea of preparing bountiful gifts for his servant to present to Esau. One wave of gifts after another, with some distance between each wave. Jacob had hoped those waves of spaced out gifts would have such an effect on Esau that he would give him time to reconsider and cause his heart to soften. while you all are reading this, I'm going to give you some other verses to look at with regards to these verses that have been read. In 22 to 23, turn to Genesis 32, 9 through 12. It says, Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who has said to me, Return to your country and to your family. I will deal with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truths which you have shown your servant, for I crossed over the Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, for the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother of my children. That was one of the things that was kind of in the forefront of Jacob's thinking, was how his brother would greet him once they met. In verse 24, when Jacob was left alone by himself, you can turn to 32:30 in Genesis. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle of the shank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of the muscle shank. Since Jacob was alone, he had time to pray and consider what lay ahead of him. But how can time alone with God calm our anxieties and give us clarity? For me, when I spend time alone with God, it helps me to understand and realize the significance of the things that are going on around me that are affecting me. And at first, and at times, I'm first very anxious about things. But after spending time alone with God, He gives me more clarity to see the situation in a different viewpoint, in a viewpoint that will help me to understand what I need to do in that situation. In verse 25, now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." But he didn't let him go. And they continued to wrestle. And in verse 29, in chapter 29, verse 10, it says, "And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother." You know, Jacob was considered a very strong person with the things that he was able to do physically. Most people would have probably given up wrestling for long periods of time. But the person he was wrestling with was either an angel or it was God. And through all this, it helped Laban to understand what he needed to do and could do with regards to Esau. In verse 27, so he said to him, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." And in Genesis 27:36, it says, "And Esau said, Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He has taken away my birthright, and now, look, he has taken away my blessing." And he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" This was Jacob talking to his father when the trouble between him and Esau began.
That was a legitimate way for
And in verse 28, it says, "And he said, Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed."
Well, isn't that kind of strange that the bad one got the good name,
Uh-huh.
but then in the end, I guess God would see ahead and see that that other son was actually not going to be good in the long run.
Yeah.
So that's why we can't question. That's why it says for us to not judge.
In 28, in chapter 17, verses 5 through 15, it says, "No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made your father of many nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my own covenant between me and you and your descendants after you and their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and your descendants after you. Also, I give to you and your descendants after you the land which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God." And God said to Abraham, "As you shall keep your covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations, this is my covenant which you shall keep between me, you, and your descendants after you. Every male child among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a sign of your covenant, and I shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male child in your generations. He who is born in your house or brought within with money from any foreigners who is not your descendant. He who is born in your house and he who is brought with your money must be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for everlasting. And the circumcised male child who is not circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, that person shall be cut off from the people. He has broken my covenant." That's some pretty strong words.
Well, that was a symbol to shut off the world.
Yeah.
To cut off the world.
No. God's grace is a continuous thing in our lives. And not only is it allowing us to wrestle with Him during this time of uncertainty, but for the ways He reveals Himself to us in those times. What are some of the ways God has revealed Himself to you during your uncertain times?
Healing from pain.
What'd you say, Luanda?
Healing from pain.
I can't. My hearing is
Pain.
Huh?
Healing from pain.
Healing.
Oh, killing?
Never mind. Scratch it.
You know, what are some of the ways He's revealed Himself to you, Aunt Carmen? What are some of the ways He has revealed Himself to you?
Gee, when you see things happening together, you know God did that. It isn't something that you did accidentally,
Yeah.
and it's so plain.
I don't know. I think sometimes He shows up as other people when we are needing help with certain things, and that person helps us get through whatever we're dealing with.
Yeah. When you have a need and it's supplied, you know that God did it.
Well, I hope you were able to understand what I was trying to get across today.
Well, I think the main idea for me was to keep pushing on. Like Jacob, he was just trying and trying and trying. He wasn't satisfied to just be back here. That he had to keep serving God, keep trying.
Very true.
Like wrestling there, he would not let go until he had the answer. That's how we have to be. We have to keep praying. We have to keep on keeping on.
And in chapter 33, I encourage you to read the story of Isaiah and his sons Esau and Jacob. But in 33, it talks about when Jacob saw Esau coming near him. Jacob bowed down to the ground and prayed 7 times until Esau was there for him. And Esau ran up to his brother and was waiting to hug him and hold him. And they talked, and they both said what they needed to say. And God did help Jacob interact with his brother, and his brother was very kind and generous to him, as well as Jacob was kind and generous to him, also because of the gifts that Jacob blessed Esau with. And they both went back to their respective homes and places where they were going to live in Canaan.
Nevertheless, Jacob still
Well, that's all I have for y'all today. We will be back in about 14 minutes with church services. Thank you.